You're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're delighted to be joined by Flo Besse and Jon Breeze for our latest episode, in which we're going to be talking about behaviour management and policies about behaviour in schools. Flo is an educational management consultant. She teaches child psychology and childhood studies at the Open University and has an extensive background in leadership and education. Jon is our deputy head here at the Outdoor School. Thanks for joining us today, both of you.
Thanks for having me.
I really stumbled over that intro, I don't know why today. We've got quite a meaty topic to delve into today, but before we kind of start getting into the nitty gritty, I think maybe it'd be helpful to talk about what we mean when we use the term behaviour.
Yeah, so for me, behaviour is about communication. So behaviour, in my experience working in education, is quite a dirty word. It's a negative. We use it a lot about that behaviour is not wanted or that behaviour is not okay and you're not behaving well. But we don't actually talk about what behaving well is or what behaviours we want. We're all behaving now by sitting sensibly and having a conversation, where our inner selves may be doing all kinds of things. But I think for me, we don't talk enough about what behaviours we like and what behaving well looks like.
Absolutely, I agree with that idea about describing positive behaviours and not just thinking about behaviour as a negative thing, but almost to look at behaviour as inherently neutral. Like behaviour itself doesn't have a kind of a positive or a negative. It is just what's happening. It is just that communication. So to try and view it as inherently neutral and then just think about what the desirable aspects of that are can change that perspective a bit, I think, when we think about it with children.
Yeah. Behaviour is just a thing and we're putting connotations on it either way. Yeah, that makes sense. We'll probably explore this a little bit more as we go on, but let's talk about what we would deem the mainstream approach to behaviour policies in schools to be at the moment. You've both obviously got a lot of background within working with schools, so I think you're probably reasonable people to give me an overview of this at the moment.
I mean, there's lots of, anecdotally, lots of horror stories technically, with people talking about the sorts of measures that are being put in place for minor infringements of really strict behaviour policies, as an overarching way of explaining it. I think we're getting at talking about those punitive approaches to behaviour management as opposed to promoting positive behaviour. So I think that's kind of the essence of the comparison being made, is about those punitive approaches based on really strict compliance policies, I suppose.
Yeah, completely. You took the two words, compliance and punitive. Behaviour in a lot of places is about complying to what you're being told you must do, and if you don't, then there will be a consequence that's punitive. It's not reflective, and it doesn't give opportunity to look behind the behaviour at what was actually going on or what's going on in your life generally. It's you did this which stopped that, so this is the consequence, be that a detention or what have you, and that actually doesn't address the behaviour. That it's just a punishment, and that punitive punishment we see in all spectrums of life, from education to the prison sector. It doesn't change behaviour. And that there is a real sense of entitlement that I think I see in education a lot around, I am the adult, I am telling you, you are the child, you must do. Which, when you look at that in life, if that was an adult in the workplace, that would be called toxicity and a real negative approach. But in education, it's almost seen as the right way.
I think there's something in that, and we could talk about this, couldn't we, for a really long time, but there's when you look at it in terms of sanctions and rewards and that like you were saying, Jon, right, you've done this wrong, this is then your punishment that you're receiving for that only works because it's sat in this foundation of a power dynamic, and it's it's that kind of unquestioning power dynamic of I am the adult, you will do as I say. You don't have your own power within that. You don't have, like you said, John, your own life going on that might be the causation, what's that word? Which might be causing the behaviour.
I know, I got stuck in my head then. I was like, causatory? Yeah. Is that a word? Don't know.
So we're taking the child-centeredness out of any of those practices and just sitting it in this power dynamic that is involved in all aspects of that sort of behaviour management.
It's almost seen as a threat. So, I have no problem with outcomes from behaviour, because if I do something that isn't okay, there needs to be an outcome. But
some people call that a consequence, right?
Yeah, some people would use the word consequence, but I think the reason I avoid the word consequence is when I've seen consequence in education used, it always feels punitive.
Okay.
So I prefer the word outcomes, because there is a natural outcome. If I do something, there is a natural outcome, be that good or be that negative. And actually talking about the outcome also helps me address what the behaviour was, because I could have got a different outcome.
Yeah.
Where the consequence is almost a tariff. You do this, this happens. You do that, this happens. That's not how life works. And I think a lot of behaviour policies are written as a kind of warning. You must or you will. And for a lot of people, they comply because they don't want to be told off, or they don't want a detention, or they don't want that. Where actually, for individuals, they're also unique and different. Depending on what's going on in their life, that consequence probably doesn't matter to them, because it's either a relief that they get to stay at school longer because they don't have to go elsewhere, or they actually get your attention, and that's probably what the behaviour is seeking. Which is why I think looking at outcomes, you can talk about, okay, well, the outcome wasn't what you desired. How could we have got a better outcome? And if that is actually the desired outcome was I needed more one-to-one time, which a detention might facilitate, how could that one-to-one time have been facilitated in a nicer outcome than a punitive measure?
I think there's something just linguistically so important about that, because talking about outcome, you're keeping that so tightly linked to the actual behaviour itself. Whereas when you talk about consequences, that's when we can move into talking about the natural and unnatural consequences, in terms of, whatever's happened, someone getting a detention for that's not the natural consequence of that action at all.
I was thinking about natural consequences, because they talk about it quite a lot with early parenting, don't they?
Yeah.
Like, a natural consequence of refusing to wear your coat is that you might get cold
Yeah.
if it rains, whatever. But then, what about the unnatural consequences? You're like struggling to find the link between the behaviour and what's happened as a result.
Yeah, and I think when we use that word consequences, because of all of the, I suppose, the connotations that it has, but also because of how it's just used so much in education and not questioned, it immediately shifts people's perspective to thinking about punitive measures. It's a consequence of your action, but actually it's not. It's exactly what you said, John, in terms of it's actually the enactment of that threat of that behaviour policy to go, you've done this, now you're getting a detention, now you're having to stand outside the head teacher's office, whatever it might be, stops it from becoming about promoting positive behaviour and becoming about control, because the result of that is nothing to do with the actual behaviour. Whereas talking about it as an outcome, you wouldn't be able to help but be discussing the actual behaviour itself, because you are talking about the outcome of that behaviour. So I think linguistically it's really powerful to make sure that we're thinking about the words that we're using, and the kind of lens that's going to make educators look at behaviour through. Really, really important, I think.
Yeah, and I think, you just mentioned it, but anecdotally I have heard from many parents and teachers about these kind of more punitive policies, and particularly at secondary level. And I've heard stories of people getting detention for wearing the wrong socks, or isolation for misbehaviour, whatever misbehaviour is, but and an increase in silent corridors between lessons as well, which I just think is mad. Like, the idea of hundreds of secondary school like kids in silence. But what do you guys think has led to this shift? Because, you know, I've been talking to people that have been teaching for a long time, or to parents that have had multiple kids, and they've kind of all gone, seems to be a reasonably recent shift. What do you think has led to people kind of taking this approach?
I think the word control that Flo used earlier seems to be powerfully in play. Obviously, behaviours for learning that came about from Nine Styles, which was a school in Birmingham, about 15, maybe 8 longer years ago. That was an approach around addressing what behaviours were desired for learning. And I met with the team that kind of created that idea. And it was all around creating positive behaviours for learning. And the initial output was around trying to work out how you could have positive behaviours for learning. And they really tried to look at the positives of it. But over time that's eroded and it's become ready to learn or behaviour to learn. And that focuses on the negative. And again, they use C1, C whatever, and that's all about consequence. And that is about control. That is about, you are in our setting, you must do this, and if you don't, you will have this.
But why have they done that more recently compared to in the past?
I think behaviour erodes over time. So every school I've ever worked at, behaviour policy generally needs to be revitalised and re-energised every 6 months. Because naturally behaviours erode over time. None of us teach our children at home how to misbehave. None of us teach our children how to do negative things, I hope. What we have to do is constantly teach them the right things to do. And hopefully we do that through a loving, fun, playful way, particularly with babies in early years. That seems to not happen in education. It seems to be the opposite of, we talk about the negative behaviours. We talk about what that is happening, and if you don't comply, and also that I've got children who have done GCSEs, and one of my daughters is doing GCSEs now. She's constantly being told, you will fail if you don't do this, you will fail if you don't do that, you will never get a job if you don't achieve this GCSE, which is just not true. That comes from fear that the staff are going to not be able to prove they're doing their job well, and most staff aren't doing their job well. A child's qualification, which is what GCSE looks at, is not about how that child is achieving in life, but yet that's kind of projected on them. And I just find that really sad.
Yeah.
And I think that it offers the question of the tightening control. So having more punitive measures around much more minor infringements of what are increasingly strict behaviour policies. If we then question that idea, you know, we talked about behaviour as communication. So to go, okay, we're seeing these big groups of children acting like children. And I think there's that idea about, but you're in school, so you need to be being sensible at all times. And if I, walk down a corridor in a secondary school and a big group of 10 or 12 children came out and they were whooping and shrieking and skipping and jumping and all the rest of it, do we look at that to go, they're being so disruptive in that corridor, there's too much energy, too much physical movement, they're not thinking about the impact of their noise on other people? Or would we look at that to say, wow, that's a group of children who are clearly feeling like they're in a safe environment, they're having a nice time, they're developing social relationships. So how we're viewing the behaviours that are coming out that often are just children being children, it's that question around the environmental impact. So if you think about the education system that we've got, and then all of the pressure that's on schools in terms of league tables and inspections and all the rest of it, to keep control, these things become tighter and tighter and tighter. But we're working in this, Victorian version of schooling that perhaps worked better because children, were caned, and therefore they did comply and they were quiet. So we've taken out those aspects. Rightly so. I'm not challenging that at all. Taking out that idea about caning children, but we've kept them in the same system. So children are kind of bulking against that system because it's not one that encourages natural curiosity and excitement and doesn't prioritize that safety and that relational approach. But now we can't use technically the survival instinct of the threat of physical punishment to make children comply. So then we're isolating them, or we're removing privileges, or whatever it might be. So it makes me just think about, well, it's that idea, isn't it, of children can't climb the walls if we take the walls away.
Yeah.
That actually we are putting them in an environment that is forcing them to kind of push against that, and then trying to control that in order to get these results or these achievements that, just like you're saying, Jon, how many GCSEs a child has doesn't tell you anything about that child, about how well they're doing at life, how happy or secure they are. It just tells you how many GCSEs they've got, but it's being held up as this thing that we are measured by above all else.
I think it's really sad, because in life and in today's society, we are taught to express, we're taught to be ourselves, we're taught to not conform to other people's expectations. That's what society teaches through TV, through media, through music, through the way it's moving at the moment, even politics, let's not go there. But in school, no, you will walk around the corridors quietly, you must wear this because we've told you to wear it, you must comply by that, and don't make too much noise, and don't laugh, because actually you're here to be serious or sensible. What does that mean? Like, that's just not true in society. And I'm not saying we should be unruly. Like, I definitely don't believe that either. I think it's just allowing how people can express and looking at how we can create common goals rather than do to people, let's do with them, and let's get the kids involved in that learning process, because actually ultimately they want to learn, they want to achieve, they want to do the right things. I think that is a natural thing that people want, but all that individuality is stripped out because it's done for the masses. And punitive measures and tariff systems you see in behaviour policies, this behaviour equals this behaviour, and if you do these behaviours more than this many times, well then you have to have this behaviour. It's just really sad, because actually it's not changing the behaviour, we just keep punishing it. Go back to the cane analogy. Thank goodness we don't use physical violence anymore. But the cane didn't change behaviours, it just controlled behaviours. Detentions, whatever punishment mechanisms in place, do not change behaviours, they control behaviours. And I think as soon as we step back and go, right, we don't want to control, we want to empower, you can then look at those different outcomes and work out really what we want to achieve, and get the children or adults, because adults have a part to play in behaviour, to be part of the solution. I think really empowers people to then create really amazing opportunities to get it right.
And that bit about outcomes again, it just made me think when you were talking, Jon, that if we're looking at that A equals B in terms of you've done this, here is the consequence that gets issued for that process stops any curiosity about that child from the practitioner's point of view. Whereas as soon as you start looking at outcomes, immediately it's the child is at the centre of that process. What was happening for you that led to that behaviour? Whereas if you just give them a detention or whatever it might be, there's no interest at all in that child, what was happening for them then. So like you said about not changing behaviours but controlling them, there's that idea around the motivation. So I'm not going to do that because I don't want a detention, rather than I'm not going to do that because I understand actually that's not a helpful thing to do, or whatever it might be. So we're applying these behaviourist approaches where yes, children might stop demonstrating those behaviours, but not because of any sort of level of understanding or personal growth, but because those behaviours are being controlled without the curiosity about why they came about in the first place.
Yeah, agreed. I don't think we focus enough on the primary and secondary strategies that we could use, that we use all the time. Be that if you're driving and somebody cuts you up, some people smile or wave or put their thumb up as a thank you very much, that was really lovely of you, and other people will gesticulate and shout abuse. we all have different strategies that aren't getting out the car and hitting someone.
Yeah.
And I think in school, if a behaviour is X, then Y always happens. We don't necessarily talk about what we could do as adults differently. You know, humour's a really good primary strategy that you can use. It's understanding the individual, because if we're individual based, we will know humour works with that person, where actually an eyebrow raise or a word around direction would work for that person. It's knowing the individual, but policy, and we all love a good policy, isn't written always for the individual, it's written for the masses, and that's sadly where you get back to control.
I was going to ask about this because this is more in primary schools. I think probably most of the people listening will have heard about the kind of charts that are often in primary schools about the sun and the clouds and the rain. You know, the kid comes home and is like, I've been on the sun all week, or you know, they've had a difficult day, and I remember my friend's kid being really sad that they'd been moved from like the sun to the cloud or whatever. And I spoke to a teacher about this many years ago, and she said to me, she had 4 kids of her own, and she said, I'd never do those kind of behaviour management policies at home. I'd never like bring the kids up and down. She was like, I'm very aware that, as adults, how we react to stuff might depend on how hungry we are, how much sleep we've had, like how much someone's pissed us off while we've driven into work. Sorry for my French. And she kind of said, I would never do it at home. She said, I can't know how long she's been teaching, maybe about a decade. And she was like, I can't think of any other way to manage the behaviour of 30 primary school kids. I think she was year 1 or year 2, other than using this. So I guess my question would be, what would you, if that teacher was here today, what would you kind of say in response to that? Because she genuinely was like, I don't like doing this. She was like, but I can't see any other way of being able to like continue with my lessons other than having some way to, as you say, control the behaviour. Sorry, it's a big question.
No, that's a big question, and I definitely think my experience of primary is actually they have a slightly trickier job than secondary, in the sense of they have the child from, let's say, 9 o'clock in the morning till 3:30, where in secondary you have them for an hour.
Oh,
and actually that's fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And some work I always did with secondary school teachers was around working more like the primary, because the teacher at 9 o'clock who's got you till 10 o'clock, sometimes they just focus on getting to 10 o'clock. Where actually if they were thinking, I've got you till 3 o'clock, what I do now is fundamental, that would change some of those behaviours. And we're talking about adult behaviour here, not children.
Yeah.
But for me, primary teachers really do focus on the holistic day and will work out which parts of behaviours they will address and can take that child on a journey. I think primary teachers are certainly incredibly skilled at that, because if they don't get it right between 9 and 10, they've got a real long day off.
Yeah, they've got quite a heavy day.
A really heavy day. So I think the problem I think your friend alluded to is, it depends what systems and processes there are behind her in regards to what's the school's approach, what's the school's policy say, because she'll have to comply by their policy, otherwise she won't be doing her duty. And I think for me it's about stripping it back and actually having that class buy-in in a primary setting, be it a 1-year intake or a 2-year intake. You can sit with your class and talk about what are the behaviours in the class that the learners want, what the children want, because peer pressure is a really powerful thing. And whenever we talk about peer pressure, we presume it's a negative, but actually positive peer pressures, social norms, is lifelong learning. And I think we don't teach social norms, we just kind of enforce behaviours on kids, where actually if we talk with children about social norms really from early on, they will control the kind of environment, and that's the people who you want to be controlling the environment, the children, not the adults. Because wouldn't it be amazing if a child misbehaves and another child raises their eyebrow, and actually that social cue, that social norm, which we do in the workplace and the office, actually empowers the children to take control of their own learning and their own behaviours. That for me is much more powerful. But that's spoken as a leader who has the ability to change culture and policy, as opposed to a practitioner who perhaps doesn't. And that's what I think is really hard. It's about how we approach those cultures, because if the environment doesn't get it right, the best practitioners will just burn themselves out trying to do everything.
There is so much in this one, isn't it? Going, we could talk about this and this and this, but in kind of echoing what Jon has said there. So thinking about obviously those sorts of approaches, you're on the sun, you're on the cloud now, you've moved up to the red, whatever it might be. Again, we're just overlaying these behaviourist approaches that are inherently full of shame. So a child on display in the classroom watching their name get moved from the sun to the cloud, that is a shame-based approach, whether or not that's how it is communicated, whether or not that's its kind of primary agenda, that's the result. That child, so like you said about your friend's child coming home feeling really sad that had happened, not feeling sad in terms of I'm reflecting on my behaviour and actually I could have made some better choices today, but I got shamed in front of everybody because it got moved down. And we do that so often, that whole it was spoken about on a previous podcast, the marble in the jar, and then the marble being removed from the jar for negative behaviour. A child, yes, they're not having something taken away, but if they're moving back down a chart or they're moving onto the cloud, that's the same. It's like, well, you've got to the sun, but oh no, you've just thrown that pencil across the room, so now you are having where you'd got to reduced again and diminished, and I'm going to do that in front of everybody, so all of your classmates now know that you've done something naughty. So it has got that shame element to it, which is not going to create a joyful environment where those children are so actively engaged in the learning that's around them, because they're trying to process all of these difficult emotions that they probably don't have the words for yet, certainly in early primary.
It doesn't promote positive behaviours either. If you're sat on the sun, and I don't know it, but it sounds like if you're sat in the sun, that's the pinnacle.
Oh yeah, you're at the top.
What is there to encourage me to go any further?
Well, I've achieved it.
Other than to be, another classic education word is coasting. Can I coast on the sun? What does that mean? And actually, that whole up and down scale, there will be children in our classrooms and in our learning environments that will never get to the sun. But actually, their sun could be the rain cloud, and that should be celebrated as much as those children who won't ever be a rain cloud, but they're not in the droplets landing in the puddle. I don't know. I'm trying to make the analogy. Let's zoom out and not create that public embarrassment. Like again, you wouldn't do that in the adult workplace. No. You wouldn't do it with your relationships at home. Your partner's on the muddy puddle. You probably would, but maybe not on the top of the fridge. But I think the key is it's about helping them have dignity in their behaviours, and children can do that. Ultimately, the reason for that negative behaviour is trying to ask for something, like that communication. Again, going back to what is the banging your cup on the table. I won't do it because it won't help with the podcast, but banging the cup on the table, what is that actually articulating? Maybe they're just thirsty and they don't know how to ask. Maybe they have asked and then been reprimanded, so they can't verbally ask again. What is the banging about? And it will be different for everyone, which is why you've got to zoom out and look at the conversation around it.
And thinking about what behaviours is it? So you were saying, what might we say to that teacher? And I understand the constraints in terms of the particular school and their policy and having to kind of fall in line with that. But to ask what is the behaviour that you're trying to manage? And for us all to kind of examine, we use phrases like the positive behaviour or the undesirable behaviour, but that's set by someone. Someone decides what that level is, or what's seen as a negative behaviour. So, I spoke earlier about seeing a group of students like shrieking and whooping in the corridors. Some people are going to see that as a negative behaviour. Others are going to see that as a really positive thing. And I wonder if in primary we're thinking about children sitting down for carpet time, and that looking at it from that child's perspective in terms of that embodiment, how they are existing in their bodies in that environment. Sitting down on a carpet for a child in reception is a really, really hard thing to do. They're not able to do that from a physical development point of view. That's really, really hard to do, but we expect them to do it. So just using that kind of as the jumping off example, there's so many behaviours that seemingly are trying to be managed but are actually just inherently childlike, not childish, childlike, that is a child being a child. Why is it we're trying to manage that? And is that because they are in this environment that actually doesn't allow for all of that joyful interaction and that space and that freedom to be children? So the only thing we've got left to do is to try and control it and manage it and get everybody to act in exactly the same way. So it's just thinking about what behaviours are we trying to manage, and why is it that we're managing those? Who's decided that their behaviours? Obviously there are some that we can all agree. If a child's hitting someone else over the head with a chair, yes, I think that would be pretty standard. We'd go, yeah, that's a negative behaviour that we don't want to see. But more of that low level stuff, and there's a lot of things out there in terms of guidance and things about managing the low level disruption in mainstream schools, and about not allowing low level disruption to go unchallenged. But what constitutes low level disruption is open to interpretation. That's going to come from each of our own world views as educators. So it's tricky,
really tricky. So that seems like a nice segue, Flo, thanks, to talking about how we could do things differently, and maybe why we should do things differently. So I guess, Jon, you can start by telling us about the approach that the outdoor school takes to I put behaviour management in the question, but now I don't like using that phrase. But yeah, what approach is the outdoors school taking in this kind of arena?
Okay, so we'll start with the policy, because everybody loves a good policy. So the policy is very much written around a trauma-informed approach, and trying to ensure that we allow space, that it's not a tariff system in our policy, but it focuses on what expectations there are and how perhaps we can get to them. And certainly our behaviour support we do with our staff is all around behaviour is communication, is a repeated phrase, and looking at what's going on behind the behaviours, and looking at how our learners are trying to communicate through their behaviours. And that's true for staff as much as it is children. So a piece of work we do quite clearly with staff is what behaviours are acceptable. And most behaviour can be acceptable, but not in the wrong context. So let's say punching somebody in the face, that is not an acceptable behaviour in school, but if you're in a boxing ring, that is an acceptable behaviour. So actually it's looking at what the behaviour is trying to articulate, because most behaviours you can move to being acceptable if they're in the right context. Spitting, most people go spitting, no, not okay. But if you drink some milk that's gone off, you spit that milk out. So actually if we detoxify, that's not a word.
Detoxify?
Detoxify. If we remove the negative from the behaviour, actually then we can look at what the purpose of the behaviour is. So yes, somebody spitting in a classroom is not okay, but what are they trying to articulate? Is that a sensory need? Is it actually a cry for help because something else has gone on? Have they drank something that's off and they're trying to get out? Or is it actually a show of disgust because of how they feel about somebody? Which again is probably learnt behaviour somewhere. So by just addressing the behaviour, we're not addressing what they've learnt from, where have they learnt that behaviour. Flo said earlier about somebody being hit over the head with a chair. That's unusual behaviour, right? And somewhere in that child's learning journey, they've learnt that is a behaviour that either is acceptable or has been done to them. And you can get down lots of safeguarding avenues there, but normally these behaviours are learned from something. Children learn to talk because they listen to adults around them. Children learn to swear because they listen to adults around them. Children learn to talk to people in a certain way because they listen to adults around them. So it's zooming out and looking at those factors around them that are putting in. So in our school setting, we're obviously a special needs school, and we're able to look at individuals' learning needs, and we very much focus on their learning journey. We focus on their understanding them, because actually every child has their own journey, be that their home life, be that their educational life, be that their medical needs, and looking at, okay, well, where are they at in that journey? What's going on for them? Is that dietary? Maybe they don't have breakfast and the first thing they need when they get to school is some breakfast. And it's looking at how we can have an ongoing conversation with the children about what's working well for them, and actually it's all about them. We're not comparing them to somebody who's sat next to them, because they're completely different human beings. And our approach is very much about treating each other as individuals, because we all get it wrong. The staff in the room, or metaphorically because we're an outdoor setting, but the staff in the environment or the children in the environment get it wrong. But it's learning from that. And you know, it's very popular, I think, in the workplace now to say that we learn from mistakes.
Yeah.
It's not very popular to say that in schools, unless you are saying it in a tone of, you will learn from this mistake.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the tone, it's the action. If we're empowering children to learn from their mistakes, and mistakes are okay, which I think is another important phrase, it empowers the children to get it right. And certainly my staff does a lot of work about getting to know the child, understanding the children, building social norms for them, because ultimately we want to empower these kids to be able to go into society and be members of society that thrive, not just survive. You know, I know a lot of people who have got great qualifications but won't be able to cope if they're given the wrong change in a shop. And for me, that's where society seems skewed.
Yeah. So can I'm going to do like a practical example.
Yeah.
So let's say two learners have had a fight in the woods, like just a verbal fight, like getting cross with each other, and one of them's, I don't know, like throwing a pencil case. I can't think of anything else. Like maybe not the learner, but just like into the woods or something. What would happen in that instance, like with the staff around them, with the learners and stuff?
I think it would be around those primary and secondary strategies. So a whole host of things could be used, be that humour, be that distraction or deflection, or be that removing the audience. Because most people fight, we're using the word verbally argue, because other people are watching, and I won't back down because somebody else is watching me and I don't want to look the weaker person. So sometimes removing the audience helps. Other times we can turn it into a debate, because actually people fall out, and actually learning how to fall out well is a real important skill that a lot of adults don't have, never mind children. But teaching children to fall out well is really important. So okay, you've just disagreed with something, let's do that, let's debate it, let's talk about it, rather than let's take the emotions out of it. So yes, okay, you both disagree on, I don't know, world politics, like let's remove all of the world politicians. I was trying to avoid him, but
sorry, elephant in the room.
Let's remove the politician, but actually let's address what the issue you're discussing is. And that actually empowers kids to have a really good conversation. Throwing a pencil case, if it wasn't at them, it's not okay, but it's not the end of the world. Like, let's pick the pencil case up, let's make it right. So get the child who threw the pencil case to make it right, pick the pencil case up, clean it if it's landed in mud, apologise and give it back to the person, or put it back where it should be. How many adults do we know that might tap the desk or stomp their foot or go for a fresh air break because they've had a disagreement with somebody, rather than actually address the issue? And you know, we could get really deep into why relationships break down in adulthood, because we don't address behaviours, and we don't address falling out well, because if I fell out with that person, I no longer like them, is kind of the association, which isn't true. You know, a healthy relationship should be that you fall out well often, because you aren't meant to be the same as everybody around you. And I think that's a deeper thing. But falling out well, I think, is a really positive thing, as long as you remove the personal approach. It's not a personal attack. It's my values, my life, my experience, my journey doesn't align with yours. Why is that? Because I'm not right. I've just been brought up in the way I've been brought up, on the journey I've gone. Yours is different. Let's look at both of those and work out where there's commonality.
And I think taking your example, it kind of exactly as that example, I think there's also a piece in there around, as staff, when we let stuff go, so when we don't intervene at all, certainly at the beginning. So I think, you know, in that example, two learners have fallen out, they've had a verbal fight, and one of them's thrown something, not at someone, just thrown it. If those learners then carry on with their day, it's that ability for the practitioner to just pause and go, hang on, does this need me at all right now? If there isn't, you know, something that needs to be addressed in that particular moment. And then it's that whole bit about later on that afternoon or whatever it is, when that child has had time to come down from that level that they were at, to then go, are you all right? Because that looked a bit difficult earlier. So just that approach in terms of going, okay, you had a difficult interaction. I'm not going to try and use this as a teachable moment about whatever, but it's about that, again, that relational pedagogy of going, I saw you have a difficult experience, so I just want to check in that you're okay. In terms of that if you look at it in terms of promoting positive behaviour, obviously that's what we're talking about, to go, actually, this happens, we need to give ourselves time to chill out from that, and then we need to check in with ourselves. Like, that's all part of that promoting positive behaviour. And then the natural consequence bit, say it was their pencil case, it gets left in the woods wherever they tossed it, and then later on that afternoon when they're supposed to be doing whatever writing, to go, yeah, because you chucked it in the woods, didn't you? Right, you're going to have to go and get it now. Like, the consequence is that they threw it and now they don't have it, so now they've got to get up and go back out and get it. Almost with something really kind of low level like that, like Jon said, actually it's kind of neither here nor there if it wasn't at someone. It's just a really gentle, natural consequence for that. And I think sometimes as educators we can be too worried about making sure that we use every single teachable moment, that sometimes we don't allow for just those really normal human interactions. Like Jon was saying, we fall out sometimes, but unless there's something that really needs addressing in that, we let it go. It doesn't need to become a big thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like your behaviour policy is quite fluid. I don't know if that's the word I want, but it doesn't sound like you've got kind of like strict this. So I guess I'm wondering about how we interpret the policy on a case-by-case basis, because we know that not one size fits all when we're working with individuals, but how we're still kind of fair and consistent in our approach.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we avoid tariffs, so we actively do not have one of those, and we won't. What we do have, because obviously you have to lay out what is kind of touch points. So we talked about outcomes. We endeavour to not exclude, or we endeavour to not do certain things, but there will sometimes be a natural outcome that may look like that. But the key piece of work around that is about the restorative and about the re-engagement. So our behaviour policy very much talks around our approach and talks around our reflective nature of that, as well as knowing the individual. So we have learner profiles that will talk about what behaviours are green, so what are really good behaviours, what are amber when I'm not so happy, but I'm not in tertiary, so I've not kind of lost all of my normal control mechanisms. What's red, which is that tertiary behaviour, I've lost control of what would be seen as a socially acceptable norm. And then that blue, which often schools don't talk about, that coming back, so that either toxic guilt or that quite reflective. Sometimes you may see self-harm in that kind of blue process. And self-harm isn't always self-injury. That could be self-deprivation, self-negatives. Or it could just be that actually I'm really sad, or I might cry, and actually, again, crying's a really powerful thing that sometimes we shut down. But we talk about what blue behaviours are, because then staff working with that child will go, okay, I might be new to you, but I've read the paperwork and I understand that this looks like an orange behaviour. I need to be proactively engaging with you. What strategies can I use that are going to help you get back to green to avoid going to tertiary, which is red? Or actually you are in red and I'm about to see some blue behaviours. That's a positive sign, but I also need to allow you to have that space.
But presumably they're not using that language with the kids saying
no,
this is red behaviour.
No, definitely not. Although with some of our older children, they can reflect on it, because the best learner plans are the ones the learners have done. At first, perhaps you have to scaffold it. But if a learner's very much able to identify, I'm feeling sad because I've just had an argument, or I'm in that blue behaviour, whatever language we can empower the children to have, if they're going to use those phrases, great, because actually they're taking control. And that's ultimately, we talked about control at the beginning. the ultimate place you want to be is where the individual is in control of themselves and is wanting to empower everybody else to be in control of themselves. Like that's a big thing for life. But I think that's where I go to in regards to enabling individuals to take control of themselves, and those behaviours, however you dress them up, and for us we just use those 4 colours because they're really helpful for us, means that then we can identify that. And sometimes that's non-verbal cues as well as verbal cues. Sometimes that could be around eating, you know, how many of us eat when we're stressed, and is that stress normally a blue behaviour? Possibly. Could it be an amber behaviour because we're feeling overwhelmed? Like that's in the adult arena. We seem to forget that actually we're all just children pretending to be adults. Like, let's be honest. And I think that's where I go to, really.
Yeah. And I think that's nice in terms of, you know, someone could at very, very kind of surface level make the comparison between describing behaviours on that you know, green, amber, red, blue with the clouds and rain behaviour charts, but it's completely the opposite, because what you're doing with that is you're providing identification and descriptors, and that's the child can then identify. So it's like, I know that this is my framework, and actually I'm being reflective about how I'm feeling, and I think I'm moving towards this, rather than that being imposed on them by someone else interpreting their behaviour to go, I am moving you to the cloud, or I'm moving you to orange. You know what I mean? It's that identification. And when we can raise the awareness of behaviour and give children the language or a framework to be discussing it in, it's supporting that self-reflection, supporting that self-control to be managing their own. So it's a really I think, yeah, like you said, really important for the learners to be at the centre of that reflection process.
Yeah, and it's not a visual chart. There is no public humiliation, which again a lot of the time you see in the environment of education. It's about publicly embarrassing or, you know, producing their name on the board. Some schools do it because you've done really well, and other schools do it because you've done really bad. Actually, your name being on the board is a challenge. Like, even if you're the brightest of child and your name's on the board because you've done really well, you are singling that child out. And for some children in the room that'll be great, and for others in the room that'll be, oh my goodness, I need a hole to swallow. If at work your name was put on a pin board because you'd done something negative, you'd be getting your unions in. You wouldn't be accepting it. And equally, for some people, their name being on the notice board because they've done something well wouldn't resonate positively either. But I think we so often see that children just aren't treated fairly in that manner. And for me, you know, how often have we heard the phrase, I'll respect you when you respect me, by an adult? We almost need to just repeat that, because that works both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've probably painted quite a harmonious, calm kind of picture of what the outdoor school is like. And obviously, because of the nature of the learners we work with, a lot of them have come from very complex backgrounds. I know that it's not always calm, and it's not always a little verbal argument and everyone kind of mooches off and does their own thing. So, like, if we talk about when things have kind of escalated and, you know, people's emotions are high and, you know, maybe someone's hurt someone or something, what does it look like then with how your staff are kind of interacting with those learners?
I think it's really important to acknowledge we don't always get it right. We're humans. We aren't yes, we've talked about all of the nice methodology and ideas. The reality are we're human beings that get it right and wrong. And that's, when I say the word human beings, I'm talking adults and children, and parents and paid professionals. We all get it right and wrong, and there are times where our learners dysregulate, be that physically or be that verbally or emotionally. Ultimately, it's about changing the face, so removing that member of staff who may actually just be really sad or hurt that child said this to them. How can we empower somebody else to step in, not to belittle or to say you can't cope with that right now, but actually give them the ability to go to reflect on it. So I think we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we have the ability to swap people around if needed, and that doesn't that isn't about creating inconsistency. That is about creating the ability to reflect. Because so often in education, we respond because we're in the heat of the moment, and a lot of the time in mainstream, they don't have the ability to go, right, actually I'm going to step out of the room myself and get a breath, because I've got to finish this lesson in the next 45 minutes, and there's nobody who's going to step in the room to release me. So we do have a little bit of luxury, I guess would be a phrase, because of our staffing ratios do help with that. But I think it's always about allowing that behaviour to land, because when I talked about the colours, staff are also having blue behaviours, red behaviours, hopefully not tertiary where they're shouting and swearing, but red behaviours happen internally with adults. And the key is allowing us all to be maybe moving towards that green behaviours, because that's where the real positive reflection happens. So often I've seen schools try and do reflective, restorative conversations when everybody's in red, including the adults, or everybody's in blue, and actually, you could have a child condemning themselves or saying stuff that actually isn't true because they're just reflecting. They're still in that processing. Restorative only really happens when you've been able to put it down. So yes, we have those negatives in regards to kind of high-end behaviours, and the key is about supporting individuals. So be that supporting the learner by supporting with other adults, or be it supporting the adult by having people around them, kind of protecting their well-being and allowing them to have space to go and get a coffee or go and get some fresh air away from the group, allowing that capacity. And okay, that slips into a little bit of our approach educationally. For us, the individual's well-being is much more important than the academic journey on that day. Which again, I've worked in mainstream. That subject, you've only got 50 minutes, and if I don't teach you it now, you're not going to learn it ever. That's just not our approach, and I understand why that's some schools' approach, but I'd just like to question, should it be the approach? Because that pressure of I have to teach you this in this time actually creates some behaviours from the adult and the children that are undesirable. But that's about pressures from external sources.
And also defeats the object in terms of, if you're not addressing the social and emotional needs of that child, they're not in a position to learn anything anyway. So it ends up being this this really pressured cycle that is then the reason that the desired outcome isn't achieved, because we're keeping that learner in a particular heightened state that means they can't learn anything. So
amazing. I think we are kind of getting to the end, but is there anything else that you guys were thinking, I really wanted to talk about that we haven't mentioned? Any pressing topics that you thought, I thought we might cover that?
No, I just think all I say about behaviour is it's always an ongoing conversation, and nobody's perfect at dealing with behaviour. I have children and I'm no perfect dad, but I'm always striving to be the best I can be. I work in education and I work with children, and I'm always striving to be the best I can be. There's always new ideas out there, and there's always new challenges, but it's about talking about it rather than 1 + 1 is 2, because actually behaviour's greyer than that. It's not black and white, but it's about ongoing reflections. And I think it's really important that we don't get to a system where if you do this will work, because that is the epitome of control, which we see is not okay.
And I think that requires that really consistent whole staff perspective, because it's not this one size fits all approach. It's not this is what we do when this happens, but what all of this stuff that requires, Jon talking about your school staff, that requires decision making in the moment, because there isn't this pre-prescribed, right, when a learner does this is how I respond to it, and in order for staff to be able to make those decisions in the moment, that's about a really embedded, like you were talking earlier, that cultural approach. Actually, what do we mean? It takes us right back to the beginning. What do we mean by behaviour? What is that telling us? What's our approach? Are we trying to manage it, or are we trying to promote positive behaviour? And that learner-centred approach places an awful lot of emphasis on staff perspective, to be able to make the right adult decisions in that time, and that's about how schools examine their own behaviour policies and practices, and what kind of analysis they're doing of that, to go, okay, is the culture right across the school, so that we can make those much more fluid learner-centred decisions at the time.
Yeah, I think behaviours, my kind of summary would be behaviours are motive, because we emotionally get invested in it. And actually, for me, I want to spend a lot of time investing in each other's emotional piggy bank and giving positives, because there will be times we have to take negative withdrawals. But if we've not done the positive work beforehand, when we take that negative withdrawal, are we in credit or are we not? Because when you're not, that's when the really sad stuff happens. So, for me, our staff do a lot of positive investing in our children, in our parents. We proactively phone parents positives, because we want people to be in that really positive place. Because life's hard enough. We don't want to hand through.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much for your time today, guys. I know you're both very busy.
Thank you. Good.
I've been asking everyone these last 3 questions to finish. And it's always silly, because everyone I talk to is so busy, but how do you relax? Anyone want to start? Flo looks like she might struggle to answer this one.
I was thinking about this, because I knew it was coming. And at the moment, I like to clean. That's my relaxing thing, and I was trying to work out why that was. Not least because I've got the whole family of Vax cleaning products now, so I like to clean carpets and steam clean bathrooms. But I think it's because a task like that, in terms of it being relaxing, the cognitive demand is really low. And that's a really nice change. When we're working with all this stuff, it's all these kind of strategic things and trying to work out how it all works and put things together. Actually, a cleaning task is easy, it's physical, and it has a start and a finish that's really clearly defined, and you can go, I have just done that job, and walk away feeling really good. So that's my kind of de-stress, relaxation, feel like I'm achieving.
Do you do other people's houses when you're
No.
Because I'm just saying, mine is an absolute filth. Jon, what about you?
So I think I've got a dog who's really good for my well-being. He forces me to go for a walk. I often say my brown dog keeps the black dog away. So my dog's really good for me. As well as, actually, I do quite a lot of DIY projects, and I think probably similar reasons to Flo's just talked about the cleaning. I don't focus on cleaning. But if I've got a project that is taking it from start to finish, there's nothing better than putting up a piece of furniture. I love flat pack furniture. I'm probably in the minority, but I do. But there is real success of stepping back at the end and going, that's built, it's done, we can move on. Because so much of my role in leadership is getting it to the place where it's ready to go, and somebody else goes and finishes it, which is great, but I don't get that sense of done. And certainly working with children, well, they're never done. So actually you don't get that sense of getting achievement. So I think I like projects that I can see finish, and DIY for me is a nice
the way
space.
forward. Nice. And what are you reading or listening to right now?
I have been reading, and the author's name has just clean gone out of my head. It's called, talking to you about this earlier, it's called The Biology of the Mind. Really interesting book around that idea about, so often we can look at the brain as a completely separate entity that's separate from our bodies, and is this kind of conscious controlling computer that's making these kind of decisions, and talking about actually how it is not the case at all, and is so our emotions, our feelings, and the rest of it are so linked to our environment. But I kind of hooked me, because when when you start reading that book, it talks about eating the brain as a snack, because actually it's really fatty and it's got lots of vitamins in it. And why is it that we have stopped eating brains? And it talked about that. What did it call it? Oh, I can't even. The cerebral mystique. Because we've then built the brain into this idea of this, that's where our soul exists, that's where our personality exists, so we can't eat it. So yeah, that's what I'm reading.
Okay,
It's interesting.
nice.
Brilliant. I'm reading a book called Nexus. Can't remember who the author is, but it's a brief history from the Stone Age to AI about how humans seek to gain information. I've got some. It highlights about the increased power of algorithms and data in control and manipulation of information, which then poses the challenges of individual autonomy and social structures. I can't decide if I'm terrified by the direction we're going or reassured we've been there, done that before, and it's just repeating history.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting perspective on where, and because it goes back to Stone Age, it talks about how things happened then, and then the Industrial Revolution, and how everybody was losing their jobs because of the Industrial Revolution, and then talks about AI and the fear that AI is going to lose everybody's jobs because of the power of that. But it goes back to that social kind of structures and individual autonomy of, where is information, knowledge, or attention key. It's really interesting.
Nice. That sounds super interesting.
Can we do a podcast just on that?
Absolutely. Dig in.
That sounds great.
You'd need somebody much more intelligent than me.
And we haven't really talked about being outdoors much in this podcast, or at all, but because it's on the name of the podcast, I'm still going to ask it. Why is being outdoors important to you?
It changes something, doesn't it? For me, I regardless of what that environment is, there is just a different feeling being in a building to stepping outside, and I think there's like a calming effect I can't put my finger on, because it doesn't always look calm. So it might be, really kind of high activity, but I think I would love to actually understand the kind of neuroscience behind it, and I don't, but I know how it feels, and there's something very different physically that then can alter my perspective on things. So it's a really useful, even if it's literally 3 minutes just standing outside and feeling that difference, that has a really positive influence.
Nice.
Yeah, for me it's that non-sterile environment. We can sit in a room and there's no airflow, there's no smells that aren't natural, there's all of that kind of sterile environment, where if you go outside and just look at a deciduous tree, which are outside our windows now, they lose leaves, they kind of weather during the winter, and then they bulk up and grow and produce leaves. And I think subconsciously the nature teaches you a lot. And feeling, I have no hair, but feeling the wind through your body is really powerful. And actually I think it just makes you realise that actually we are all like the deciduous tree. We're all going to weather at times and drop things and then pick things back up and grow. And for me, reconnecting with nature is really powerful for allowing me to feel like actually I'm part of this ecosystem that he's building. I am not the ecosystem, I'm part of it. And I think sometimes sterile environments makes you almost in a fortress, where actually if you're in nature you're vulnerable, and that's okay, because if that tree does rot and die, it's going to produce other things. And for me, nature's really powerful at just reconnecting us with our core purpose.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your time, guys. Really enjoyed the chat.
Thank you.
All right. A massive thank you to Flo and to Jon for coming to talk to me about behaviour and what we mean by behaviour and how we approach this topic when working with children and young people. I found it to be a really interesting conversation, really affirming, and I hope that whether you're a parent, an educator, or just an interested party, that you enjoyed the conversation as well. If you did, as always, we would love it if you would rate the podcast, subscribe to it, share it with your friends, and do all the things that means that more people will find us. We'll be back in a fortnight with another episode, but until then, thanks for listening.